Welcome to Marking the End Times. I'm Mark Hitchcock, and last Sunday was Groundhog Day. And as I read the headlines dealing with the current events in Iran and the Middle East, I was reminded of the 1993 movie Groundhog Day, where Bill Murray's character finds himself trapped in a time loop, forcing him to relive February 2nd over and over and over again. And when you think about it, for decades, the intractable Middle East crisis has been like a dark version of Groundhog Day, where we just seem to be reliving and repeating and retracing the same scenario again and again. But that this week, on the 2 days after Groundhog Day, President Trump has announced some stunning actions that have the potential to change the Middle East forever. That they shattered the old kind of perpetual paradigm. They broke the Middle East mold, and they've really taken the Middle East and the world by storm. I mean, his actions were a real shock to the international system. They turned everything on its head, and all the parties are scratching their collective heads, wondering what's coming next. And so that's what I want to do on today's program. I want to examine and evaluate these major events that are taking place and some of the prophetic ramifications. So I want to look at several monumental movements this week related to Iran and also to Gaza that are altering the landscape in the Middle East dramatically. And so these moves also, it's very interesting to me, coincided with the visit of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to the White House. And I don't think that's an accident, but a lot of these executive orders were signed and these announcements were made while he was present. I love this really for our country, that the Prime Minister Netanyahu is the first foreign leader to visit the White House in President Trump's second term. And I think that's very significant for both nations. I mean, it's showing the cohesion that exists between our two nations. It's a message to the world that the U.S. has Israel's back and that the U.S. supports the Jewish people unreservedly. Prime Minister Netanyahu, in his comments at the White House, made this statement. It's a great statement. I think it's true. He says, President Donald Trump is the greatest friend Israel has ever had in the White House. And so that's an important statement, I think, for both countries, and it has a lot of implications for the future. Now, before we get into today's topic, I want to briefly preview the content in this week's subscriber-only section that I'll be discussing later. What we're going to do this week is continue our exposition of the book of Revelation. We're just making our way just systematically, methodically through the book of Revelation. And today I want to finish Revelation chapter 5. Again, this is my favorite chapter in the book of Revelation, and this chapter really is the setup or the prelude for the rest of the book. So understanding this chapter is a key really for the rest of the book to make sense. It's a striking scene of God's heavenly throne and Jesus coming up to that throne to receive a seven-sealed scroll. And Revelation chapter 5, verses 8 to 14 is really heaven's response. I call it when all heaven breaks loose. And so that scroll really is the prophetic key to everything that follows from that point on. So we'll look at that here in just a bit in the subscriber-only section. But the Middle East has been the dominant story this week. It's kind of been a little bit quiet over there the last few weeks. They've had the ceasefire. The guide that takes the groups that I take to Israel there with us, he was here visiting this last week here in Oklahoma City with me and my wife, and he was telling me right now in Israel there's kind of a little bit of a sense of euphoria. They have a ceasefire there now. Some of the hostages are beginning to come back, and so there's kind of a sense of a bit of hope that's increasing there. But while that's happening, there are a lot of stories that unfolded this last week that are really almost hard to keep up with. They're happening so quickly. But let me mention 6 of these. This is quite a bit of information. It's kind of a little bit of a potpourri, but they all revolve around Iran and Gaza. So I want to talk about Iran first, and then I want to talk really about just these blockbuster developments that are happening in Gaza. The first story is just Iran's renewed threats. Iran, I've mentioned this on our program several times, is feeling more vulnerable and frightened today than ever before. And so they're making a lot of threats. There's a lot of bluster and bravado that's coming out. Al Jazeera has a report this week, says Iranian foreign minister has told Al Jazeera that any attack by Israel or the United States on Iran's nuclear facilities would plunge the region into all-out war. So Iran is trying right now to do all they can to deter and head off any action by Israel and or the United States to strike against their nuclear capabilities. So they're trying to project an image of strength to try to avoid any strike against their nuclear facilities. A second story related to Iran is about underground missiles there. The Jerusalem Post has a headline that says, Iran's Revolutionary Guards unveil new underground missile city. And so this is the third underground missile base unveiled by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps in less than a month. And so again, this is a clear message they're trying to send to the U.S. and Israel and some of the Gulf states that they're still, a force to be reckoned with. And so again, what this is I think Iran is trying to project an image of strength. They're trying to show that, look, we have what it takes. We can deter some kind of attack against us, or if we are attacked, we're going to trigger an all-out war in the Middle East. A third story is about President Trump. He said that he's left his advisors clear instructions for Iran to be obliterated if it assassinates him. So this is a retaliation for any assassination attempts. And so, obviously his successors wouldn't have to follow what he says. But all of this really comes about because back in 2020, President Trump ordered the killing of Qasem Soleimani, who was the head of the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force. And so there have already been, plots to try to assassinate President Trump that many believe have been led by Iran. And so he's kind of getting this out there that if he's assassinated by Iran, that Iran's going to be obliterated. They're not going to exist anymore. And I would believe that J.D. Vance, probably who would take over for President Trump, probably would follow that. So we can just see kind of the threats here going back and forth as the rhetoric is just being raised to a new level. Also, in a fourth story, President Trump wants to reduce oil exports from Iran to zero. He wants to hit Iran hard economically. He wants to starve Iran of its oil wealth so it can't pursue its nuclear ambition and finance its proxies in the Middle East. Reuters has a story that says Trump reimposes maximum pressure on Iran, aims to drive oil exports to zero. Tehran's oil exports brought in $53 billion in 2023 and $54 billion a year earlier. Output during 2024 was running at its highest level since 2018. And President Trump had driven these oil exports down to near zero during his first term after reimposing sanctions. And of course, during President Biden's term, they were able to evade a lot of these sanctions, but now he's going to drop the hammer on them again. Fox News says Trump reinstates maximum pressure campaign against Iran. President Trump unveiled an executive order reinstating this maximum pressure campaign. So what he's trying to do here, I believe, is drive Iran to the negotiating table to surrender their nuclear pursuits and also to reduce any involvement they have with these proxies or surrogates in the region. A fifth story, Iran is rushing its nuclear program. The New York Times headline, Iran is developing plans for faster, cruder weapons. It says this, new intelligence about Iran's nuclear program has convinced American officials that a secret team of the country's scientists is exploring a faster, if cruder, approach to developing an atomic weapon if they decide to race for the bomb. Such a crude weapon is the kind of device Iran could build quickly, test and declare to the world that it's become a nuclear power. While it would be difficult to use such a weapon against Israel, it could have a deterrent effect, making countries considering attack against Iran think twice. So they're trying to speed this process up. It may be a cruder weapon with not as much distance to be able to be delivered, but something that they could rush and produce very quickly. Now, President Trump this week reiterated this statement. This is his word-for-word statement. Iran is not going to have a nuclear weapon, not going to happen. So the gauntlet has been laid down. And so we see this back and forth between the U.S. and Iran that's taking place. And all of this, of course, is just keeping Iran in the news week after week. And Iran is one of the key players in the Gog-Magog invasion, Ezekiel 38:39. Now, here's the biggest bombshell of all. This exploded across the world. The U.S., according to President Trump, may take control of Gaza, a rebuilding effort there, and get other nations involved. And he even said that U.S. troops could possibly even be deployed to that region. Now, I think what's fascinating to me is he made these announcements sitting next to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And President Trump reiterated his view that Gaza is basically uninhabitable. That the buildings have been demolished. There's no electricity there. His idea is that as many as 1.8 million people should leave. They're going to be totally displaced, and they'd be housed in 4 to 6 areas in Jordan and Egypt and some other unspecified countries. Now, I don't have to tell you this, but this has stunned the Middle East. Arab nations are already coming out, voicing their strong objections to this, as are many others. But I think there's some truth to what President Trump is saying. Gaza is uninhabitable. They can't go back there immediately. The people will have to live somewhere else while this takes place. Someone will have to take control of this or oversee it. And obviously, it can't be Israel. That would trigger an all-out war in the Middle East. But as I think about this could break several different ways. First of all, this could be a tactic by President Trump to gain bargaining leverage in future negotiations. We know that he does that. We know that he prides himself in the art of the deal. He did that with Canada recently. He did it with Mexico. He's probably doing the same thing with Greenland, maybe doing the same thing with the Panama Canal. And he kind of states a grandiose, kind of exaggerated vision, and then those who are involved in it are just happy to get something less than that. So that could be what's involved here. Just got a bargaining chip here that he's using. But also, this is very important. This could end up being a key to the ongoing peace process, because Saudi Arabia, that's the big prize that's out there that President Trump wants, to have Saudi Arabia normalize relations with Israel. And the sticking point in that has been Gaza. Israel's continued bombardment of Gaza and the lack of a viable two-state solution. But if all the Palestinians are moved out of Gaza for a period of time, the U.S. takes over there, and a lot of these other nations like Saudi Arabia are brought in to bring their wealth to bear to rebuild that area, that could very easily give Saudi Arabia kind of an out to be able to normalize relations with Israel, because the Palestinian problem, at least in the short term, will have been solved. So this could be also something that he's doing because he realizes that this can bring Saudi Arabia to the bargaining table and gain what he calls that deal of the century. That would add them to the Abraham Accords, which of course would be a major step forward in peace for Israel, which we know is one of the preconditions for many of the events of the end times. The Antichrist will broker this peace treaty ultimately with the land of Israel. So we don't know how this is going to break, but we do know that whatever happens, this will deepen the age-long hatred of many of these Arab nations towards Israel. And we know that these displaced Palestinians, wherever they end up, are just going to continue to seethe, and this problem's just going to continue to simmer. There's going to be more of a grudge, more resentment, more bitterness that's just going to continue to build up. And I think all of this will just continue to be a fuel to kind of put on the fire of the coming Magog invasion of Israel that's predicted in Ezekiel 38 and 39. So what we're witnessing right now, just this week, is a potential remaking of the Middle East. We're witnessing Iran under siege. We're witnessing Palestinian control over Gaza, at least in the near future, in serious doubt. So there are far-reaching prophetic implications both for peace and for war. And both of those things are coming in the future. Peace is coming to the Middle East, to the Antichrist at some point in the future. But we also know that war is coming as well. And all these things that are being set up both have dramatic implications, both for the peace and for that war. And how will it all play out? Well, time will tell. Stay tuned. Well, we're going to go to the subscriber only section now and continue our exposition of the book of Revelation, Revelation 5, verses 8 through 14, when all heaven breaks loose. If you're not a subscriber, you can go to endtimes.com and you can sign up there just for $7 a month and become a subscriber and support and help us what we're doing here at endtimes.com. We'll go to the subscriber only section now and look at Revelation chapter 5.